Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Christy Goforth, the chair of the Landmarks Commission, and we will kick the meeting off here. And so we'll start first with a call to order and then our roll call by Doug. It looks like maybe Peggy is missing.
Yes, I'm expecting her to be a little late, but she is hoping to join us.
Excellent. And then can I get an approval of the minutes or a motion to approve the minutes from December 8th, a little while ago, since we've had this action.
I'll move.
And a second?
I'll second.
Were there any edits or corrections in the minutes? Okay, and if not, all in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, minutes passed. Are there any public appearances here this evening? All right, someone there raising their hand. Hello, you're on mute. Can see your mouth moving. I'm not that good of a lip reader though.
Mic is open.
Sorry, I'm consultant.
Okay, hello. Thanks for joining
Hi.
us. Hello. And then Barb, did you want to make a public appearance today, or are you just here to observe?
Just here to observe.
Okay, thanks for joining. Okay, then we're going to move on to item 5, unfinished business, and we'll open our public hearing on the certificate of appropriateness for a demolition permit for a Monona landmark structure at 4227 Winnicove Road, the Springhaven Pagoda. That's case number C-020-2021. Doug, can I turn that over to you to kick us off?
Yes, I can just kick off and give a little background just for those joining us or watching on delay. Back in March of 2021, the City Council awarded the contract to remove and replace the pagoda roof in Stonebridge Park, concurrent with the other improvements. Detailed plans for the roof were developed by Patrick Egan. In August of 21, the Landmarks Commission had a site visit to the park and to take a look at the pagoda. The roof project was put on hold given the much more deteriorated condition than first expected, which was noticed during the construction project. Included in the packet, the meeting packet, is the memo to City Council to terminate the roof replacement project, as well as photos from that August-September time period. Again, there is a September 1st letter included from Patrick Egan with a structural assessment. There was concern in there over the required extent of the work, and he recommended removal of the structure. At the September Landmarks Commission meeting, the Commission asked for a second opinion prior to any action on the request. And part of that, there was a letter developed by CMR, which again is included in the packet. They noted that they were not structural engineers, but they did include an opinion, which again is in this March packet. We've since worked with Kurt Strauss of Structural Integrity Inc. To provide a full assessment and the requested second opinion. Kurt's letter is included in the packet, and he's joined us for the meeting to answer any questions. I'll pass it over to Kurt for more details at this point.
All right, excellent. Thank you for that comprehensive recap. Is anyone here? So who is here to speak on this? Is there anyone here that wants to speak in the public hearing?
So I thought we could possibly have maybe Kurt Strauss introduce and sort of discuss his letter and his findings from the site visit, maybe in the public hearing, and then potentially move to the discussion for sort of commission questions and dialogue.
That sounds great.
Okay. Well, in my February 8th letter, I talk about a little bit different direction than what was envisioned maybe in the 2016 approach. When Mr. Egan did his report, we had in that 2016 work thought that it would be prudent or maybe not so challenging, I guess, to remove the roof and replace it, citing that it had been repaired a number of times before and the repairs haven't kind of stuck, So when Mr. Egan said that he had concerns about the bases and there was some corrosion in the dowels that attached the base to the stone foundation, that was getting my attention, like, what could we do, or maybe what we could do differently to save the pagoda if it was, deemed appropriate to spend that amount of money or whatever on saving it. So instead of removing the cover, maybe what we do is we approach repairing the cover again. The biggest thing that the cover has going for it, it doesn't have any central cracking. All of the cracking is related to the outside frying of the edges. And those repairs have not lasted at all. And in my letter, I outline the second approach or the second paragraph of the recommendations says basically build it back the way people have, and then just kind of try to keep it protected. I did mention one extra step that would be a good idea, and basically putting an epoxy stripe or strip around the area or the interface where the new meets the old to try to keep the water from infiltrating into the cracking at the top side. But in the third paragraph of the recommendations, I take that solution and I go even further by saying that maybe what we should do is introduce a new technology, a technology that wasn't invented before, that is common now in terms of strengthening concrete and masonry structures, that being carbon fiber strips. Carbon fiber would allow us to provide the ability for the edges to take tension in the top surface, and that's what we want. We don't want the things to bend off. Then that carbon fiber would keep that gap from being opened up, a gap that might open up actually fairly easily with regular dowels that have been done not so successfully over time. The carbon fiber is an epoxy product as well, so it tends to shed water. So you get the benefit of having a waterproof surface if you do that as well. It's not the best looking, it looks fairly high-techy, but I would imagine that we could paint this with a concrete colored gray epoxy paint afterwards to seal the entire top cover during the replacement. And my costs are outlined in those versions as well. Keep in mind, I'm not a contractor. I'm just kind of ballparking these things, okay? So it's a different approach than what was originally envisioned. But it's, represents a cost as well.
Right. Is anyone else here to speak at the public hearing? If not, I will close the hearing. Okay, we'll close the hearing. Thank you so much for that overview, Kurt. We'll move on to discussion and possible action on the certificate of appropriateness for a demolition permit for the Monona landmark structure, the pagoda. Yeah, thanks, Kurt. I thought you really brought some really innovative thinking and solutions, and it's kind of a different considerations for us. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, all right, very good.
And anyone on the commission want to start with any questions or thoughts?
I'll start. We're talking about the roof again, which was not the original scope of what we were having discussed. We were discussing the columns and the base and whether or not
Right.
they were structurally
Right.
supported.
When we did our observation, we noted that most of the columns were in contact with their bearing surfaces. There was one column that appeared to be chipped on the edges that may have been off the ground, just a fuzz. But we can repair that quite easily with repointing, like you would repoint a stone wall or a masonry wall. That can be repaired fairly easy. I would say that if there was corrosion in the dowel pins that were connecting it from the legs to the to the foundations, that these columns would have spalled. Basically, if you have corroded rebar or reinforcement, the corrosion takes up a lot more space than the actual steel. And it can actually be a very, very, very strong jacking force when this corrosion starts to happen. And so if there is corrosion in the leg, in that rebar, we would have expected to see those columns cracked at the bases, and we did not see that. So we suspect that if there's any corrosion, it's in the lower half of the dowel that runs from the leg down into the stone. And even if we have a very small amount of connection to the foundations, I believe that this would be a stable structure, since I believe that the tops of the columns are doweled quite strongly into the edge beam of the structure.
Okay, and so the reasoning that we had motioned to demo this structure is because we felt that all the patchwork and the repair and the repointing would not match the original structure, and it would just make it stand out quite a bit more.
That's a fair call. There are lots of structures around that are historical, and we actually try in many cases, if we're doing a pure restoration, to suggest that certain elements were not original to the structure. People have to get used to or understand that it's not going to quite look the same. There are ways of staining concrete. There are ways of cleaning concrete, old concrete, to make it look a little fresher. But you're right, it will strike a little bit of a different texture and color.
Right,
Certainly
and
the roof will be a different color because we're proposing to epoxy coat it to make it waterproof.
And the whole understanding of a landmark and the reason for the historic aspect of it is its original parts and pieces and materials that have been used. So when you're proposing to add in new technology and new materials, that overrides the purpose of a landmark. You're looking at National Park Service's standards. You cannot like just patch and repair without it making it look like it's original.
There is a way out for structural engineers. If a structural engineer deems it important for safety, certain those guidelines can be overridden. But I agree, it will not be the same. And I'm trying to be a scientist and say, if you had to fix it, this is how you would approach it.
I thought the reason for the demolition is because it wasn't structurally sound anymore. Not because we could.
I was pushing on it pretty hard and I couldn't get it to budge at all. I couldn't move it 1/8 of an inch.
And that's what you said when you first saw it, when you were working with Charlie, that it was structurally sound. And
Yeah.
so you've been consistent, even though there was kind of damage done in the interim. But I think there was a lot of concern when that damage cropped up around the time the park was being remodeled. And a lot of people thought because the column was swinging loose, that it had lost its structural integrity.
I would say it's not swinging. I would say that it's firmly attached at the top. It might be, there might be a space underneath the stone or the concrete, sorry, between the stone foundation and the concrete, but there's also a fixed dowel in the foundation that would keep it from swinging. And I believe there's a rigid fixity at the top too, where reinforcement runs from the edge beam down into those columns. So I doubt that it's swinging freely. I think it's
Okay,
fairly
that's good to
stable.
know. So I think if we get past the point where we don't think it's structurally unsound, then I don't think we should be considering demolition. We need to be considering repair or rehabilitation options.
And Kurt, can you state again, you said the epoxy would have a different color or
Well,
would tint it?
you can tint epoxy any color that you want. And you can do a mock-up of several different and select the best. It does typically have a shiny surface, although if you put a wire wheel on it and buffed it, you could dull it down. You could make it, like a Scotch Brite pad or something like that. You could dull it down so it wouldn't shine, so it wouldn't catch attention, I would think.
Okay,
But it would look different. It would look like, a bathtub surface rather than a concrete surface, certainly.
okay, got it. Yeah.
Certainly you can see it when you're up on top of the bank. You might see a very small sliver of the pagoda roof if you're walking up normally. Really depends on your height and how far you are away when you're trying to envision it.
Okay.
Kurt, I don't know if can you hear me?
Yes,
I have 3 questions for you. One is, so you're stating that the pagoda as it sits right now is structurally sound, or it needs work to become structurally sound?
I believe it's not in danger of hurting anybody unless somebody hit it with a substantial, I'd say, piece of equipment or a football team.
Okay, so that's news to me, because when we visited the site as a group, some people were giving the columns a little push and things were moving.
I couldn't get it to move by myself.
And I'm not arguing that, but I'm just saying it looked and felt very unsafe. But if you're a structural engineer, so my second question is, would the epoxy possibly come in a clear? Painted concrete
Yes.
looks very different
Yes.
than
Yes,
unpainted concrete.
it would be in its natural state clear, yes.
And that might be a more appropriate option, although we'll probably get some, I don't say glare, but some sheen to the concrete, right?
The issue is if we employ the carbon fiber solution, that is obviously
Yeah, not clear.
not clear, and you'll be able to see the carbon fiber if that is included in the design.
And then my third question has to do with cost. And I know you stated that these are very rough estimates, but you
Yeah.
did include an estimate. So I'll ask a question.
Okay,
In these numbers, I'll say for the second one, it was $40,000 to $50,000. Did you include like moving the stuff off-site and having somebody work on it and then bring it back and that kind
No.
of thing? You
no, I'd
didn't?
like to do it in situ.
Okay, all right, that's good to know.
Most of the effort or the ambiguity in my number, I think I would like to say that reproducing that edge, it has a very detailed edge that is missing around most of it, but is present in a very, very small area. And trying to get that formwork right or correct for the other, 4, 5, 6, 7 sides, 4, 5, or 6 sides might be a challenge. And I don't know how a contractor would approach that.
And I'll ask a fourth question now, so I apologize, but
Right.
let's say we do the second option, and it's 50 grand and we use we paint it. The visual will be impacted, like Rebecca stated, but if you start painting concrete, it looks different than raw concrete. But how long how long would that last? I mean, in 10 years, are we going to be trying to have to do this again, do you think? Or
I would think
20
not.
years or?
If you looked at the maintenance of the epoxy and had a nice drip edge, like we're proposing putting back, water is the evil part, right? That's what damages all of this. And if we could keep the water from infiltrating into the structure itself and protect the foundations, I think that this could last 25 years before
Okay, thanks.
more major issues are needing to be dealt with.
Thank you.
And can we step back and please review how you would repair the column that needs to be affixed at the bottom?
All right, so when we visited it, there was snow on the ground, lots of ice as well. We could see a general idea of how the bases were resting on their foundations. But what we would propose would be to have high pressure washing and rinse all of the debris out of that area and expose which columns needed to be repointed. And then point the columns down to their foundations. I didn't know at the time of my visit whether the foundation stones needed any repair, if they were mortared together, if they were dry stacked. I suspect at one time they were probably mortared because the foundations seemed to be generally in place. But we would like to make sure that any mortar missing from in between stones of the foundation would be taken care of at the same time. But it would be, again, akin to repointing a stone wall or a brick wall. You'd remove the bad and install new hydraulic lime or a lime putty mortar.
And then that would also make the entire structure level in a sense
Well,
versus a tilting of some type.
did you notice any tilting? I did not. I thought.
No, I'm
that-
just wondering if there was any. I don't
No.
notice any, but
I didn't, yeah, I think what we do is we just fix it where it is,
okay,
lock it in place.
right.
Yep.
Do you think that if we were to do a computer scan, a laser scan of the columns, which I don't think we've done yet, that would help in creating the formwork to repair the column base?
I think it might give the contractor a better ability to bid it, but I have a feeling that it's just going to be some artistic contractor trying to understand what the ledge looked like and then reproducing it with table saws and band saws until he gets it right. It might be something like calipers trying to get the curvature and then going over to Brunzell and getting a wood molding that matches the negative of it, and then using the molding nailed to a form board, and then taking the negative of that molding off, leaving the positive there. Something like that, I would envision.
And that damaged column was the column closest to the lake shore, correct?
Oh, I'm not sure which one it is, I'm afraid.
No,
It wasn't?
the
So,
closest to the retaining wall.
oh, it was, okay.
And when it comes to picking contractors, I think that's going to be a challenge for us. Because we put this out for bid once before, and our bids came back astronomical. There was only one bid. We were just at a loss.
What was the bid? I don't know if I remember.
EMR or something like that.
Is this for the roof or for the prior to that?
It was for the structure, the
Is that
roof,
the bid that was in here?
but it was
Okay, that's not.
in the six figures.
I don't think they-
Or
There was one that was a 300 and something.
80,000.
All right, well, that was a complete removal, right?
Right, that was.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
might be a little bit different because they don't have to worry about temporary shoring to brace the columns. They don't have to worry about taking things off-site or material or, like equipment to pick and move. Most of
guess-
it's just concrete and formwork.
Well, I guess the issue, I think, I guess what I'm trying to get at is there weren't a lot of bidders.
Yeah.
And we had trouble finding someone who could actually do some of the work that we originally wanted, different than what we might be asking for now. But still, I mean, do you have any experience with
Sure.
contractors who do this kind of work?
Yeah, and I would be recommending a Joe Daniels or a Bachman Construction. They would do the concrete work, and I would recommend like Xander Solutions for the epoxy work as a sub.
Okay,
I work with Xander a lot when it comes to basement walls that are failing. A lot of concrete block foundations have these horizontal cracks in them and they're moving into their basements. And it's a really great bullet to apply carbon fiber straps on these walls and keep them from moving into the basement anymore, because it's putting the tension fiber exactly where you want it, on the inside face, farthest away from the compression face. And it's becoming a pretty popular repair. So using that sort of idea, we're applying that to the roof here too.
will the carbon fiber banding, will that read as a band, or will it be a smooth?
Will it
Will
what?
it
I'm
read
sorry?
as a separate band?
Oh,
on the top of the roof
it's
or-
not very thick. It's, I don't know, it's like a 64th of an inch thick. It's very thin.
Oh,
Mhm.
and so you could paint over it or something like that so that it would be a smooth
That's the
surface?
idea. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. You would be able to see, the stripe would telegraph through a paint covering a coating, but not very much.
What do you mean by telescope through?
Telegraph.
Telegraph.
For example, yeah, if we had a crack in a concrete floor and you smeared new concrete over the top of it, in a couple of years, if you had any movement, the crack below would telegraph through the new
Oh.
topping. That's what I'm just trying to say. In
Okay.
that instance, I believe that this substance that we're putting below, the lines or the depth would telegraph through a dried surface of a coating on top. You'd be able to see where the band is, but you would have a hard time noticing it if you weren't really looking hard for it.
So would we have to hire somebody like yourself to kind of design the project so that we could then bid it out?
I think that that would be a good idea if you were going that route.
Right.
Having tight documents will allow tighter bidding.
So at some point, if you or somebody like you were contracted, would we then get a better, finer estimate?
That's the idea.
Okay,
Yep. Now, one other thing that we might consider is actually bringing a contractor in to make sure that we're not crazy, right? Talk to these guys, say, this is what we're trying to do. What do you think? And see if they come up with anything that on the periphery we didn't find or think about.
talk to the people who might actually do the work.
Indeed.
Kurt, last September, we had concrete and masonry restoration look at the pagoda, and they filed a report, which I'm guessing you saw.
I'm not familiar with it at this point. I probably scanned it, but I can't recall what, if anything.
Right, well, they gave a one-page analysis of the pagoda, not in terms of its structural integrity, but in terms of trying to restore it.
That's what I remember.
Yeah, but they didn't give a price that I'm aware of.
Oh, they did?
I don't believe so.
I think that there are pieces and parts of the project that go beyond the pagoda itself. Like the well needs to be dug out, and some of the surrounding features, I think, have to be maybe take a second look at. So
Yeah.
before we plow into a new project, I think we just want to do something, I would recommend that we do something comprehensive that deals with the structural issue of the pagoda, but then some of the surrounding issues as well. Because
Right.
if we have a well that's been clogged up with a lot of debris right now, and I don't think that would be fitting for the final project.
Right.
Would you be involved if we were working to clear out the well? Would that make it easier for you to get at that stone if you wanted to repoint it?
I think it would be. We would probably have a problem with water table. With the words, this is an active spring, and some of the areas of the foundation won't be accessible because of that. Even if we cleaned it out, it'd be underwater. But we could use concrete will still cure in the presence of water. If we could get a repair into a joint without it dissolving, we could get it to cure. And I guess what that means is, I don't know how freely water is flowing into that, but maybe what we do is we put a piece of plywood on the bottom, clear it out, put a piece of plywood on the bottom, put a sump pump in it, and remove water until we can repair it, and then let the water come back, and then let the joint cure.
I think it's seasonal in terms of its flow.
Sure, I'll bet you it is. You know what? One other thing I thought of, and Doug and I were talking about this when we were out there, is that because this is a spring, it would have the tendency of not to freeze so hard, where you would have, a big frost depth. You know what I mean? If it's got water running around it, it tends to almost keep those foundations a little warmer than other areas in the, for a house or a business or something like that. And that might really play into the fact that these foundations are doing better than expected.
Wow,
Or doing,
that's interesting.
maybe there has been work, but they don't look like they've gone up and down too badly, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, it's my theory that, you know, the pagoda was intact as of 1951, when we have that photograph. But then a lot of the deterioration happened after that. And I think some of it might be attributed to some sandblasting that they might have used to clear off some of the graffiti.
Yeah, that can be very harmful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's stood pretty much intact, at least till the 50s.
Yeah, we would be against that sort of approach. There's chemical agents that work really well, citrus types of chemicals that will remove graffiti. We worked on the Garver feed mill, and you would not believe how much graffiti we took off the wall.
It was an abandoned structure for quite a while.
Yes, it was.
So at this point, Doug, are we basically voting yea or nay to approve the demolition?
I would say at this point, the element for discussion is the demolition permit. And then, you know, that could be at a later date further discussion again of the possible next steps, possible additional research, things like that. But yes, the item on the table tonight is the demolition permit itself.
Well, hearing what I'm hearing, I think it'd be appropriate. What would be appropriate, to deny the permit or table it? I'm not sure we've done both, or we mostly tabled it.
So it was previously tabled, as I recall, so it would need to, I guess, for due process, we probably should take it off the table and sort of bring it back. But I think just given the timeline of this and looking at the ordinance, I do think unless there's significantly more information or deliberation to be had, I think an action would be appropriate. Just given the timeline, you know, this was first introduced in September, I believe. So if the commission is comfortable, that would be my suggestion, would be to possibly have that deliberation.
Okay, so should we get a motion then right now? How about, can we get a motion to remove this from the table? We probably should have done that first. Let's do that, just to do the housekeeping.
I'll move that we remove this from the table.
Okay,
Is that
a
right?
second.
I'll second.
Pass it around.
If we don't remove this from the table, is that,
I think it was just because it was tabled in a previous meeting. I think in September or October, so it's just a due process of bringing that, as I understand it, to be able to then have the
Discussion.
any future action. Yeah.
And so Rick stated his position. I feel I agree with Rick that it sounds, you know, what we're hearing here is that it's pretty structurally sound, which was in contrast to what we've heard in the past. How are other people thinking about that? And are we ready to take a vote on that, or any more discussion? Do you have any thoughts, Peggy? Yeah. Yeah, you, Peggy.
Well, I'm kind of with Rick. I think that I'd hate to see it be demolished if it's absolute, as we can make it, preserve it, keep it. And maybe it doesn't look exactly like it did 100 years ago, but it's still there. I don't look like I did 100 years ago either. So, so I really am not in favor of doing any demolishing work or anything at this point, right? I think that we keep getting more and more information that says that it could be repaired and preserved and kept, and I think that's huge.
I just want to speak to that a little bit. In order to be a landmark, it has to have something notable about it. Just because it's old doesn't make it a landmark and doesn't make it historic. And you know, back in the 70s or whatever, they determined this was a landmark. There's something special about it. And I think that that's the concrete that was used, the crude vernacular structure itself, why it was put there, who put it there. And we're talking about making all these types of repairs that are going to alter its visual integrity and are not going to be the historic concrete that was used. And I just don't see how you can call it a landmark still if you keep adding all these additional materials to it. And also, how much is that gonna cost? You say 40,000, but you're talking about like making a mold to do the edge of the roof, and you're talking about all these different epoxies or fiber materials, doing it in place, weather-related circumstances. And is it really gonna be 40,000 or is it gonna creep up? And do we have the money for that?
I think there's 65,000 in the budget right now.
Is that still budgeted, Doug?
It is, as I understand.
And the Hamburgs have contributed $10,000 to that too.
So we have how much?
75.
I thought the 65 included the Hamburg money, no?
I think it was, it didn't include that. no.
Wow, okay. 75, you're right.
Anne, do you have any thoughts back
I
there?
think that whatever we can do to obviously keep the structure is wonderful, but again, so then the concept is do you bring in a whole new one? Well, then it's not a landmark at all, because you brought in a whole new structure. Where this way, at least if you can make a 30% repair on the complete structure, there's still 70% of that structure that is there. The spring is still there. That's a natural monument right there in itself, where, you know, I just think that anything you can do to keep the original structure is wonderful, instead of having to remove the whole thing. And I think I was the one that brought forward the demolition, but that was on the word of the workers that were there the day we did the tour. You know, I mean, what can you do? You have to go with who tells you what at that time. But now we're getting told something else, which is even a better positive way of looking at it, that we can at least keep the structure and the spring. So I'm all for just doing the repairs. I mean, I think it's with any old structure, you have to do repairs, whether it's with wood or metal or anything else. This is concrete, so we have to do the concrete. We don't have the wood to replace or the metal to replace. Yeah.
I think this is saving more of the historic fabric than we were doing before.
Correct, with the whole new roof.
Right, so this is
Yeah.
more of the fabric that we're
Right.
preserving with this option.
And then preserving the spring itself, because we could say, well, let's just cap it up and forget it. You know, that's another road to go down. That it's a hazard that we need to cap it up and move on.
But
And then
that-
we lost everything.
I was gonna say, there's also the fact that now the park has been kind of built around this structure and around the spring. So, you know, we're kind of in that position as well.
Good point.
It's made to be a focal point of this park. So something needs to be there. It maybe, you know, maybe just the spring itself, I mean, would be adequate, but it seems like it would be a little unusual.
And you can't see the spring itself most of the time, so you need something there to represent that the spring is actually there.
Yes, yes, it seems that way. John, did you have any thoughts back there on this?
Putting the fact that it's a landmark aside for a moment, I would have a tough time voting either way until I knew more information.
Okay.
And the information I would need, and I hopefully Kurt can agree with this, but on projects like this, or just projects in general right now in the construction field, we're advising our clients to ignore quotes because of the volatility and pricing and scheduling and things like that. We're in a very unique time, a very turbulent time. And so I am pleased with Kurt's report. It was different than I thought it would be. And so I would want to, if this were my own project right at home, I would say, thank you, Kurt, for this report. It's
Mhm.
excellent work. Now I've got to understand from somebody who's actually going to do the work, like a CMR who has looked at this already. If this were me, I would give Kurt's report to CMR and say, hey, CMR,
Mhm.
are Kurt's numbers, are they real? Or, what kind of, because we could all vote a certain way today and then in a week find out that the numbers, well, it'd be nice if it was half of what it was, right? But it could be double what it was. And then what are we doing? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so I think, I don't know if that's an option, but I think validating the costs, I guess. And I don't know if we can just get some advice from a single source to get a better comfort level versus just putting it all out to bid as just some advice that, yeah, we're in the ballpark and then we could put it out to bid. I just think it'd be nice to have that kind of level of understanding.
I agree with John with that, but I also want to add that I think that the products that you're talking about using, it would be nice to see an actual sample of it, to see how, what we're looking at, and what it would look like against the structure.
It's going to be challenging for us because we're going to look for it. I think the average person,
Right.
seriously, if this were to be done, would probably never notice.
I mean, there's,
But that's what we want, is the average person to not be able
Yeah,
to distinguish.
Because it's on top, what we're talking about, and we're going to pick a paint color. If we pick a color that tries to match the concrete, right? And I could put a red top on it or something. I hope. So, I mean, I think, if that's helpful.
And then Brenda, did you want to chime in at all or any thoughts on this discussion as well?
Yeah, sorry, I don't have much of a voice. That's why I'm not
Okay.
present in person. So no, I think that if it's structurally sound, we need to look at repair. I understand we're talking about repairing with modern materials, but it's landmarked not just because it's made of, not just because it's old concrete. It has some local historic significance in just it's been a part of the community and a gathering place, and mentioned repeatedly as a gathering place for people. And so I think it holds our local history as well. So I do think it has not just value in the old structure, but in an old structure that's been in continued use. So I think two separate issues of, are we going to take it down? It doesn't sound like it's structurally unsound. So separate from whether we repair it is whether we take it down right now because of structural integrity.
Yeah, I would agree. It seems like we've got once again, a little more homework to do since we have Kurt's report. How do you feel about that, Doug? If we could take some action and possibly to take that report to, I mean, Kurt, would you think it would be like, should we take that to someone like Bachman or Xandra that you suggested, or Joe
I
Daniel?
think that'd be a good idea. If you already have a relationship, I'm sorry, EC, is it?
ECR?
The
ECR?
CMR.
CMR, sorry. And they seem to be professionals in the area of some sort of concrete restoration. I don't know if I've ever heard of them.
They're Milwaukee.
I'm sorry?
They're in Milwaukee.
Milwaukee, all right. I think that's an excellent idea because you do want to know in this volatile time if costs are real. And then you want to know from them whether this is a good idea or not.
I think the positive thing is that the CMR in their letter alluded to the idea that they could restore it. So,
Good point.
and I think having Kurt's additional information would really help and guide them to maybe give us a ballpark estimate.
I think it's a more complete picture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all have to accept that whatever price, like you said earlier, whatever price they quote may have no relevance whatsoever, 3 months from now, depending on how all of this goes. So I don't know what we do about that contingency there.
Yeah, they'll typically, if they give us a number,
Let's stick with it
they'll
regardless.
stick with it. They'll tell us how long it's good for,
Okay.
kind of thing.
10 days.
But that's.
5
getting shorter and
minutes.
shorter.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Gas goes up 5 cents a gallon every day. So what do we do?
Okay, so at this point, I'll throw it out there for any more discussion. Otherwise, if someone would like to make a motion, I think we could entertain that idea.
Bob, what was your motion though, that you had, for the demolition, you had motioned to
I
take,
motion to untable it.
so did we ever vote on that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
we
we did.
did. Yeah, okay.
But now it's a matter of, do we deny it or approve it? I think. So I'll move that we deny the demolition permit.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any more discussion on that? Okay, if not, all in favor? Oh,
That has a question.
Could we, just for record keeping, have some sort of reasoning, just kind of a couple
Sure.
elements to that motion, if I could.
Yeah, sure. Well, to just sum up what I think many people have said is that with this information about its structural integrity, and with some possible rehabilitation options to explore, I thought it would be appropriate to deny the demolition permit and explore those options.
is that adequate, Doug?
Yes, thanks.
And Peggy seconded that?
Seconded even better now. That was great.
Okay, are you comfortable with that? Okay. All in favor of denying the demolition permit, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, that motion carries.
Was there any abstentions?
Any abstentions on?
Because I didn't know, did everyone vote?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So that was
We're
unanimous.
all in on that one.
Okay, got it.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Kurt, for your work and for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you, Kurt.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Good night.
Right.
Just a point of process. Structure is it owned by the city or is it owned by the Parks Commission? Because I'm kind of
Parks is owned by the
curious,
city.
what?
Parks is owned by the city.
Is that official? then?
City.
So I would say it would be, yeah, it's on city property. The park itself, would fall within the purview of the Parks Board.
Right.
For the designs and things like that, but they still went to city council, so it would still be city jurisdiction. So
So any structures on that are owned by the city as well?
as I understand, yes. Yeah.
Okay. I just wondered, what Parks Commission's role should be in all this?
Mhm.
And, it looks like we've been taking the lead on a lot of this work, but I'm kind of wondering, we may be getting ahead of ourselves with some things if Parks isn't fully aware or on board with some of this. So I think there has to be some kind of joint agreement or joint way of dealing with this so that we don't get ahead of ourselves.
And I would say in some part that sort of breakup of roles was displayed last year, for example, with the park. So the design itself went through Parks Board, for the park at large. The pagoda work was all considered by this body because it is the local landmark. So to me, that was sort of the breakup of the two.
Somewhat disjointed.
No, I would say that to me, that just showed the roles of each group.
Okay.
So
And so you're thinking about a similar path, is that right?
I would say so. I think we had discussed, and I think there was some, joint dialogue at times and some of that took place. But as I recall, as part of the park redesign, the pagoda area itself was very much left to to this body, and there was some discussion about how the grading would maybe go and things like that. So
Yeah.
I would say there was the dialogue between the two. But certainly, I mean, if there is a larger plan or something into the future, I do feel that at least some communication with the Parks Board would be appropriate.
Well, I think just the action we took today should be communicated to them.
I can pass that along.
Communication is always good, whether it's required or not.
All right. Okay, we'll move on to item C. Discussion of the stipulated strategy for the certified local government grant funding National Register nominations.
Thanks. So I can just kind of introduce this. This was building on obviously the discussion from the December meeting. Really, how is the money going to be spent leading into the full 2022 deadline? A couple things have changed. There was an agreement on the priority list of the stipulated strategy. There was good discussion at the last meeting. A couple things to point out. The first one, and we'll discuss this again later in the agenda, but the Commission Assistance and Mentor Program, the state did redirect $6,500 of the CLG grant to cover costs of that training program. So that is going to be for training for commission members across the state. I would strongly recommend members of this commission to join that training as you're available. It is early April, April 6th and 7th. I've signed up. It's all going to be virtual. But that is going to be $6,500 of that original $25,000 that has been spent. So we had been in discussion about obviously about funding and things like that. And I received notice that they had taken that decision to use the funding that way. So definitely, it's a resource for people across the state, but certainly I'd encourage you all to join as you're able. A couple other developments as well. I think there was general agreement to proceed with the plaques for the successful National Register properties. They were deemed to be no longer eligible for spending. That was an update that came from the National Park Service. They previously, the state had expected that would be eligible, and it was pointed out to not be. So that is, again, another change. And some good news, I did receive notice from Matt Arrow, the owner of 110 Henua Circle, that he would like to proceed with National Register nomination. So again, that was something that had changed since the December meeting. And just to kind of build upon that, I did check in. We are getting pretty tight on timelines now to certainly, be doing something like that with all costs to be spent by that. I think it's end of August, spend down with sort of reporting into September. I did check in with UW Milwaukee, who had of course done one of the properties. They do have capacity to be able to do that. So just to check that it would be even feasible. So I reported back to Matt that it was great news that he is interested, but I would bring it to the commission because of course that's a development from last time that we spoke. A couple other things, the educational programming, I sort of fleshed that out a little bit more based upon discussion at the last meeting. So I think there were a few things, there was the educational materials for future National Register properties nominations, showcasing local examples in Monona. So kind of a piece, if the CLG funding is no longer available, but somebody says, I'm interested, something that we can hand out or sort of periodically use. The initial educational materials for the possible Frostwoods Historic District, as was discussed as well. Another piece which came up in discussion with staff was the potential here for a high resolution map highlighting existing local landmarks. If I recall, it is just kind of a hand-drawn one that we have at the moment. So it could be something, again, that, with the design skills, we could potentially have something that would last quite a while there. And then again, finally, the public library materials to potentially, showcase something in advance of Historic Preservation Month. So to allocate some funding there. So I did also check with UW Milwaukee. That is, again, something that they can do. Again, we would sort of speak about scope after this meeting. But they we could speak about a budget and maybe what materials could be produced within that, and if there's a specific piece or a couple of items there that are of higher importance to this group. And then finally, the San Damiano Archaeological Survey, I put that as a pending steering committee review following discussion at the last meeting. That is something I would suggest we kind of keep as a placeholder. That's, as I understand, still something that's a possibility. And with that level of funding, it would be something that could be diverted, but it also wouldn't stop the others from proceeding. So it was kind of just a placeholder. As I understand, things will become clearer in the next couple of months about that, about the extent of funding needed, or if it's something that would be agreeable to the steering committee. So I just wanted to put these out here. Looking for some feedback. I'm ready to sort of get things moving on here, just being conscious of timing, but I feel enough had changed since December that I wanted to update the commission and just see if there were any red flags or anything of more importance or significance that they would like to pursue. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, appreciate that update. Do you know offhand if that training will be recorded and available afterwards, or do people have to be there?
I do not know. I can look into that and share that with the
That'd be
commission.
great. It sounds really valuable, and sometimes it's hard for people to clear their schedules.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's too bad about the plaques. I thought that was a great idea. I think John made that suggestion, and that's unfortunate.
Yes.
Anyone else have thoughts or comments on this?
Do you want other possible properties for nomination? Because I'm thinking with Jim Drager's house, when we first approached him, he said, I want to finish up some repairs before I do it. And that was over a year ago. So he said maybe next year. Are you kind of done with nominations, or do you want some more suggestions?
I think there had been more recent contact, and
really?
as I understand, he still wasn't
wasn't
looking to pursue that. So
I knew.
I think we are pretty tight on that timeline.
Okay.
To just with the research and the work required for those nominations. Okay. But I think my stance at least had been that obviously that was the original intent of the grant, was to get national register nominations. The other elements are useful, but as with the Henua Circle, if something came forward ready to proceed, that would at least be my position. But as I'm aware that there are not many others that are close to sort of switching.
We've covered the waterfront.
So Tony, I just have one question on the list. The creation of a map. Where would this map go?
It would be something on the website. So, something we certainly with COVID realized was when we did the walking tours and things like that, having, something that could be printed out either 8.5 by 11 or 11 by 17 or on a cell phone, pulled up pretty well. So
yeah.
It would be with the intent of it being more digital with the ability to print out. As I think it's the map is linked to the text to the book, but I don't think it's a particularly detailed or highly graphic map or anything like
We
that.
have a GIS map on there though too.
We do, and that started this was that has actually, there have been some challenges with that. So we can look into that certainly, and that's one element we can do with more of the spatial element. But I thought of this as something that maybe with the design capabilities, it's something that could be produced pretty quickly and easily. But certainly it's a priority to get the GIS map back up. Because that had the links to all it sort of had a little blurb for each house. Yeah.
And what are your estimates for survey and the district on that nomination or pre-nomination? Do you have like placeholders for the budget on this?
Not placeholder for the city budget for those.
I mean, in terms of how we're using our grant. So you have an estimate in terms of what they're going to cost?
I think really the way the discussion had been leaning for the potential Frostwoods district was more sort of beginning that conversation. Using some sort of consultant educational materials or even flyers and things like that that could be used as part of a mailing in the future. Or sort of leading into that. But I don't think it was necessarily for any of the specific work to that district. At least that's how.
Okay.
how I understand.
Is there a budget item for that?
Not at this time, no,
Oh,
for future nomination.
Well, I thought we were trying to figure out how to use the grant, so I thought you were giving items where we're gonna use some of that money.
Yes, and I had spoken to the state, and specifically in this application, in this original grant, we said that this was for properties and would not be pursuing the district.
Okay,
So I had sort of said, and they had agreed that, we can look at something, preliminary elements to it, maybe
Yeah.
educational things like that, but to be using that funding to maybe hold meetings or to begin,
okay,
that nomination process may not be
okay.
the best or be eligible.
And for the archaeological survey?
For archaeological survey. There were a few elements that were discussed. As I recalled from the ranking, that was not as high. And I think with the 6,500 being redirected. that
Oh,
would
so
take
there
some-
isn't money necessarily for that either.
As proposed, it would not be, only archaeological would be.
That's what I mean.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
So there is 2,500 of the 10,500 circa that is listed and earmarked for archaeological survey at San Damiano with pending steering committee review of that.
steering committee.
Yes.
Okay.
the San Damiano steering. Yes.
But it was okay with the state to use our grant money in that regard.
Yes, they were supportive of that.
Okay.
So you're saying, Bob, maybe there might be more money put into that?
I'm not sure what a survey would cost. I mean, it depends on how much you want to do. Phase one, phase two.
But I'm saying if the
phase-
plaques weren't eligible, then maybe money could float over to that.
The steering committee is already working with Ho-Chunk to do this archaeological survey.
Okay, good. That's a good way to go, really.
Considering their master plan site, I think they would need an archaeological service.
Mhm.
I think that would be a good part to have it.
And so that is it is in process as I understand, or at least the framework for that. And the cost of that is closer to this number because they'll be using Ho-Chunk. It's not sort of specifically being outsourced, by a specific consultant or something like that. So that's why the cost here may seem a little cheaper than it may otherwise have been.
Okay.
But that's, as I understand, a decent ballpark estimate at least.
So the Ho-Chunk can actually do some of the field?
So they have, correct me if I'm wrong, but they have some information or they have,
Research. and
They
review
have a
sometime.
LiDAR.
yeah,
They will
Like a LiDAR, I think it's a LiDAR.
Right,
yeah.
it's the machine that uses it.
find things.
Like an
I'm
infrared-
sure they've got
Like an
one,
infrared
definitely.
thing. that-
Okay.
That can work with now. I
Right.
don't know about other subsurface materials.
Yeah, that's what they use in all the archaeological.
Doug, can I just speak to this archaeological study a little
Sure.
bit? San Damiano, the only landmark is the house itself. The property is not a landmark, so we have nothing to do with the property. So what would an archaeological survey do for the Landmarks Commission? Would we want to landmark if there's a mound there, or what is the end goal?
So I think the end goal was, there had been discussion about archaeological surveys across the city and different sites that may be eligible. I think that this stemmed from the fact that the property would already, as I understand, was already considering that as part of the process. And so that it seemed like a logical next step for that. We, at staff level, did have a meeting, Zoom call with the COG coordinator at the state, as well as the state archaeologist. And this was deemed to be the most opportune use of that money just because of the timing and where things are. So that's sort of the history of it, that it seemed that it was already underway or in the works. So it seemed like an opportunity to redirect some funding that way, rather than necessarily implicating the Landmarks Commission directly. I think it was more just that that's something that was happening in the city already. It seemed an eligible use.
So there wouldn't be an end goal of landmarking a potential mound or something that's there.
I wouldn't say from a staff level, that it's more just an opportunity to use 2,500 of that funding for something that's already on its
How is
way.
that eligible if it doesn't have to do with the landmark?
As I understand, archaeological surveys period would be eligible for the CLG.
I think landmarking a mountain makes
Yeah.
perfect sense.
And if anything, it'll maybe be able to expand the survey to a larger area, further down the shoreline either way.
I think archaeology comes under our purview, doesn't it?
That's not my question. My question is, does the Landmarks
Right.
Commission have an end goal?
Well, I think the original reason that I recall was to help San Damiano with its planning. And since we're eligible for this funding, just making that eligible to them for their purposes in terms of
Yes.
planning.
Has that ever been on the agenda to help? I don't understand what you're saying, help them.
Well, just hand in hand, not necessarily help them, but just as a partnership that since,
Provide some funding to them in their planning of the property.
Have you
From a-
talked to?
From a landmarks commission, wouldn't it fall under the, if there is a mound there, the mound
Right,
could be a
and
landmark.
that could be
Then
landmark.
we're-
That's just
We're
my
finding out
question
if we have a
is-
landmark on the property,
Right.
another landmark, I should say, right? Maybe that's the end game. If you back up and really look at the end game, 'cause I don't know if that was the original end game.
Right.
I think that it's hard to know our end goal because we don't know if there's a mound on the property. And so once we know that, then I think then we can determine what that end goal is. And
and
then,
they'll be able to see the
No,
disturbance.
Doug answered my question, so I'm good.
So they could even go to an area that's completely flat and know that there was a disturbance and the outline of a disturbance, even though the topsoil has been removed.
and,
That's true.
That's true.
yeah, I just wanted to clarify too. So LiDAR is light detection and radar. So that uses pulse imaging radar to determine bumps and things above ground.
Disturbances in the
Contours.
soil.
And then, but Bill Quackenbush from Ho Chunk Nation, he has ground scanner as well. And so those are that's the tool he'll be using.
That makes sense.
And I think just to clarify a little bit about that element in particular, I think as I see it, it is sort of a funding opportunity and an opportunity to divert 2,500 to that, to save funds elsewhere for that project. But it is not necessarily something that's being committed. It is not something being commissioned by this body. It's already underway, and it's really almost a reimbursement is how I see it. It's not a.
I'm clear, I
yeah.
got it.
I think just the clarity of that would be important, that it wouldn't necessarily, like we had the consultant tonight, join this meeting. I think it would still just be, it would carry on its path. It would just be eligible for that CLG funding. I think just to clarify that for the group.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Doug. Okay, anything, do you need any more feedback on those items, Doug, or?
I think if the group is comfortable, I can get things underway. The educational programming, probably what I'll do is have a call with them in the next couple of days and just really see what makes the most sense, what we can get, what deliverables we can get, and sort of how that can be, spent most effectively. If there's something obviously that would require more and isn't possible with that, that's probably not such a priority. But if there are a couple others, maybe we can get a couple deliverables for that money. I think personally, I think that would be great and a great use of that funding. So with that, I'm happy to proceed and keep things moving along.
Okay, excellent. All right. Okay, then we are on to staff updates. Doug, back to you.
I feel like I've been talking a lot tonight.
That's all right. You've got a lot of information and it's been a long time since we've met, so.
So just the National Register nomination update. I did share this in the emails with the commission, but the bungalow project or property was reviewed by the state at the February 18th meeting, I believe, and it received unanimous recommendation for approval. So as I understand, it's now on the state register, and it is the sort of a final document check and things like that for it to be passed along to National Register. So I think a couple of folks joined the call. I was on that, and Tim Peglin did a great job of the presentation. And there was a lot of enthusiasm from the board as well. So some good news there. And the other two are in the queue, the other two properties as well. So hopefully some more news to share. I think it's quarterly meetings, so looking for something there probably around May for the next one.
Excellent. That's great news. And I think Jan was gonna possibly plan a little gathering on her property at some point this spring, and it will extend an invitation to this body to
Oh, nice.
come over. So that was her plan. So don't hold your breath, but that would be a really nice gesture on her part and a great opportunity to go visit the property. Okay.
Erica was at the presentation.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so she spoke in favor.
Great. Okay, then Doug, you've got the Commission Assistance and Mentor Program?
Yes, so I shared that in the email that I sent out, I think last Friday. Like I said, I recommend you join if you can. I registered, and when you register, you got the full agenda. So I did a printout here. I can pass that around if folks would like to take a look. But as I understand, so it is from a training from the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions, who I know we've spoken about in the past. So definitely recommend it, April 6th and 7th. It's afternoon and then morning. So it's a little bit easier, it's a little more broken up, a few hours each day. But I'll pass this around and you can take a look. But registration is free, and the links are in the email. So welcome to do that.
Great. Yeah, great opportunity. Okay, moving on. Next one.
Is that you?
Well, it's under staff updates. So yeah, but if anybody has any updates on DEI initiatives or things we should know?
Nothing specific from staff.
Okay. If there's no updates there, then we'll move on to any updates on sustainability efforts.
Nothing from me.
Okay, last call. All right. Moving on to new business B, Landmarks Commission requests for city staff.
You go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna ask Doug that you would share out to this body construction assessment of the Frank Alice Mansion. Or the
Yes.
home, I don't know if people have seen that. I've seen that, and I was trying to remember if this body had seen that. And I don't think we had, so that seems like it would be something we should discuss and possibly put on a future agenda item.
I can certainly share it. I believe that it's on the San Damiano link on the city's website, but I'll share that so that we have a direct link.
Okay, great. Anyone else have any items for Doug? Rick?
I know the grant we got from Historical Society, we can't get money from them for National Register plaques. But I was wondering if the city could finance one for Bungalow and maybe have a Historic Preservation Month event there, which would be in the spring. Maybe it could, be in conference and, conjunction with what Jan was thinking about. Then we could have a plaque dedication.
Nice idea.
I can definitely take a look. Just with it not being budgeted, it may be.
Well, I think the Landmarks Commission has some money of its own, does it not?
If I recall, it's a supplies budget for just a couple hundred. But I can look. I can make the ask. Certainly, the Historic Preservation Month event. I think that could work really well. So I was aware of the sort of small open house and things. So I think that could be the plaque. It may be a budget request, for next year. But I can certainly make that.
Okay. Because it's a few $100s.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, if we don't get any public funding, I'd be glad to do something.
Sure. I'll look into it, and I'll try and speak to a vendor as well, just to get a more phoned up number as well.
Yeah, try Erie's name. they specialize in national plaques. Great. And because I think one of the reasons we asked for the money is that we celebrate being on the national register to get other people interested. So I think to follow through on that, we should take advantage of this being our first building on the national register, get some press and all that.
Do you know where this is held? Do this one?
It's virtual.
Oh, it is for.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been to it.
They're really good. They're like national experts.
Okay, all right, then, if and no one else has any requests for Doug, we'll talk about upcoming meetings are April 13 and May 11. And then could I get a motion to adjourn?
Sure, I'll motion.
Oh, second.
I'll
I'll
jump
take you that one.
in. And all in favor?
All right.
Have a wonderful night, everybody. Thanks for
Thank
joining.
you, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.